Hello, everyone. I'm Magdalena, and I'm a Service Delivery Director at NetGuru. I would like to welcome you to yet another episode of Disruption Talks, where we invite top experts to discuss digital acceleration, winning strategies, innovation, and scaling products. Today, my guest is Jenny Herald, who is VP of Product Evangelism at Quantive, and we will talk a lot about OKRs. So, hello, Jenny.
Hello, Magda.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, also really, really well. Weather is great, sunny.
Not the same here, but that's okay.
Okay, so as I mentioned, we want to talk today a lot about OKRs, but before that happens, I would like to ask you to tell us a little bit more about you so our listeners can know a little bit more about your background and what you do and who is VP of Product Evangelism.
Yeah. So you can check me out on LinkedIn. The short story is at some point, I was in the military. A lot of people really don't know that about me. And at a point, I shifted into tech. You would probably think to yourself, how in the world would somebody who came from, like, I don't know, a Department of Defense background eventually work on something like a to-do list app? Well, it happened. And that kind of transitioned me into what are we trying to do? And I learned about all sorts of fun things like jobs to be done and, what is a roadmap? I had no idea what any of these things were before I got into tech. So my background is quite varied. I also have some consulting experience as well. What I do now, VP of Evangelism at Quantive, I get to champion exactly what we do, which is we enable organizations to effectively execute their strategy using our software and services to support really advancing their mission and vision. I think it's as basic as that. I really enjoy spending time learning about what people are trying to accomplish, how to help them figure out how they're going to get there. And anymore, I spend quite a bit of time on my podcast. I'm a host of Dreams with Deadlines, shameless plug. Where we get to talk to business leaders about OKRs and everything in between strategy and execution. And that's a lot of space. So that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, strategy tends to be a little bit scary for companies and employees, I would say. And it's very tempting to ask you much more about your military background, but let's park that for another conversation. Yes, exactly. So maybe we're gonna tell our listeners, just in case, what are OKRs, because maybe some of them already know, I'm quite sure, but some of them may not. So in a couple of sentences, what are those?
So OKRs. O stands for objective. KR stands for key results. An objective tells you what exactly you want to accomplish, and the key results tell you whether or not you were successful in doing so in metrics or a quantifiable way, hopefully. The whole intent is to enable, these big ideas that we have to be realized. People apply OKRs even as far as, believe this, like climate change. How are we going to make sure that our planet doesn't increase by, over 2.5 or 3 degrees on average across the globe? People are using OKRs to set objectives and measures that they're going to be held accountable so that we can achieve, like reduce the carbon footprint on our planet, like things like that. But imagine for a product team, like what we want to accomplish is seeing people change behavior based on the things that we produce, right? And so you can set objectives and key results that support your overall mission, vision, are in allegiance or alliance with your values, and definitely informed hopefully by your strategy. And so then you see this beautiful network of commitments from people to achieve a lot more awesome things together in a framework that is really simple, but not necessarily easy. So that's it.
So is OKR network or system for everybody, in your opinion, to implement, or not so much?
So this always boils down to, why are you using OKRs to begin with, right? If you would say that OKRs are going to be used so that everyone is aligned to our strategic priorities, then more often than not, most of the organization would probably need to align because your why makes it so. So I guess the answer really depends. The other thing to consider is to what degree does that team own their time? If that team's time is 100% accounted for, they're not going to have time necessarily to work on things that OKRs are intended for, which is changing a business.
Okay. You also mentioned that it's maybe easy to understand but not easy to use sometimes, OKR system. So even as a leader in our organization, sometimes I get those questions like how to connect a typical employee strategy to OKRs, because OKRs are very down to earth, and strategy is sometimes this huge monster which is very foreign for employees, and they admit it very very openly, which I appreciate, but it's not always easy to cope with that. Do you have any kind of advices how to connect the monster with the daily work, and how to make it easier anyhow?
I don't, well, that's a really good question. The way that I can think about it is senior leadership has a very important role in OKR adoption. The first being what we've discussed already, like you need to have a strong why. Why are we doing this to begin with? If you don't, then there's going to be a lot of resistance. Let's say then there's a really strong why. Everyone understands it. Like the leader's job is to bring clarity where there's ambiguity. If there is ambiguity about what the strategy actually is, like if people can't articulate, well, where are we going? What decisions as an organization has our senior leadership made? For example, if we used Roger Martin, who is kind of like a prolific writer about strategy in our space, like he is saying is this is a set of strategic choices, a set of choices that we're making. Who do we serve? What value do we provide? How are we going to win? How do we differentiate ourselves? All of these questions, arguably from a product perspective, should be well known. Like if I use a previous example from a company I worked with, we are helping people to organize their lives. How do we do that? Through a to-do list app. Where do we play? United States and Europe and China. How do we differentiate ourselves? Well, that's kind of the core value proposition and the nuances of how we do it in a to-do list app versus anyone else. So all of a sudden, right, I have like kind of a strategic context around what it is that I'm trying to do. Now bring that closer to home with a product team that maybe is working on an onboarding for a to-do list app. Like how can they connect with the broader ideas of the company's strategy? Well, you need a product strategy to kind of bridge those two, right? And that will inform, well, there's all sorts of different ways you can define this. If you talk to the folks over at Netflix, for example, Gibson Biddle, who was on my podcast at one point, says strategy could be simply enumerated as, he called it the Glee model. G, what do you get big on? L, what are you going to lead in? E, how are you going to expand? E, how are you going to expand again? And so if we thought about that in the context of this company that I was talking about, we're going to get big on to-do list apps. We're going to lead on cross-platform experiences. We're going to expand into Asia, and we're going to expand into other devices like wearables, like IoT. And so here I have this kind of really good grasp of what we're trying to do. And then from there, I'm like, okay, well, if this is what we're trying to do, this is the customer we serve, here's how we're different, what opportunities can we exploit? What are kind of annoyances that we have with our current experience? How can that support the aims of maybe some measures that we think are super important? A lot of folks will start with a North Star metric. I'm not going to necessarily go into that methodology. You can read it up. Or a constellation of metrics if you want to even start. And from there, you're like, okay, well, what are we trying to accomplish? Maybe what we need to do this quarter is we see AI as a big thing. If we don't have an AI component of strategy involved and we don't have things that are helping people talk to our thing in natural language to get it ingested into this experience, maybe that's not great. Like we need to be able to piece these things together. And the way to do that is to think about if you're going to go do something, well, why are you going to go do that? How is it going to benefit your customer? What behavior change are you trying to see? How can you have a proxy metric or a leading metric that informs you that that behavior was actually changed? And then all of a sudden you're starting to piece together that cascading of choices, because that's really what all of this is at the end of the day. When people say OKRs, like, how does that fit? I'm like, well, you had to make choices about where your company was going to do its thing. You know, you had choices about what your product's supposed to go do and who it's supposed to serve and why. Then what choices are you going to do about what activities are you going to engage in so that your customer overcomes a problem and does it in a way that's not so hard in terms of effort? Like, those are the questions we're asking ourselves as products. So then OKRs are kind of this fun choice in the middle of like, well, how do we know? How are we
Mhm.
going to measure that? How do we track that? How do we improve that? And so if we have our conversation in that context, we're in a really happy place. But this is why people feel like it's it's simple, but it's not easy, because you have to know a lot. You have to know a lot about your business. You need to know about how to make makes money. You need to know about your customer. You need to know about your market, which is probably why I love product, because you'll never get bored ever.
Exactly. And like last question from this family of questions for me, and very important in a practical aspect, is how to ensure enough of visibility across the company, because even in a company of a couple of hundred of people, sometimes thousands of people, you have so many different divisions and so many different sets of OKRs. And there is this anxiety across middle management, maybe core of the company, and employees as well, other employees, like how deep in should I go to know all the divisions OKRs? And I also saw it around me. What would you what would you give as advice around that? Is it like, okay, let's focus on middle ground and the closest ground, or something different?
I mean, I'm going to ask you, folks who ask that question, I'm going to ask you to be selfish. I'm going to ask you to be selfish.
I like selfish, yeah.
At the end of the day, you are hired to do something with a set of requisite skills and capabilities, right? To what degree are you legit getting paid to know about stuff that does not impact your work, right? We need to be able to think about how we're going to spend the one thing that seems to be so fleeting, which is attention, which is why OKRs are great. They provide focus. So you need to focus on the things that get you to a place that you are doing your best work for whatever reason you were hired to go do that thing. And so if there happens to be adjacencies to your work, you know, like other teams where you're like, oh, well, I probably should know about their OKRs, because knowing that will help us inform what decisions and choices we end up making, either in the form of objectives and key results
Mhm.
potentially that you could partner with, or it could be engaging in the actual execution of our work. That's a sphere of influence you should be thinking about. Like,
Yeah, but there's probably this gray area where you sometimes don't know you have some connections and you double the work. So probably I also saw cases like that. So this probably this gray area companies should try to cover.
which is
Um,
why technology is a magnificent thing for this, right? And this is
yes.
something at Quantive we're actively working toward, is like, who might be somebody out in your network that you don't know exists or doing things that might be valuable to the things that you're working on. Maybe you're in an Asian market and that person's a US market, but the things that you're trying to work toward in terms of your goals might be somewhat similar. Maybe we connect you to. And that's the value of having a technology solution, I think, is that it surfaces those things. Now, in absence of something like that, then you are at a disadvantage. Absolutely. But then should you actively be trying to figure out what everybody in middle management is trying to accomplish? Likely not. That said, a way to facilitate these conversations, and I've heard some of our customers do this, is they hold kind of these ceremonies where maybe at the middle of a cycle, at the end of a cycle, they have a larger session where they have some highlights or some lowlights, some really awesome wins, some really awesome learnings, And they showcase these things to provide more information and connectedness to the rest of the organization. That's great. And so there are ways to address this without feeling overly burdened. And the two that I can think of is the utilization of technology, but more than that is really creating opportunities for that knowledge share to actually happen. And that's really on the organization to have to figure it out. That could be at town halls, that could be at all hands. We have these practices already. Why not then embed OKRs if these are supposed to be the key things that we're focusing on these different departments at a company level? Why not then showcase that for everyone to understand or have some sort of periphery knowledge about, even though they don't need to be keyed on the day-to-day? Does that help?
Yes. I think it makes a lot of sense. So very close to our current discussion, question we got is from Radek Zaleski, who asked when not to use OKRs. He's happy to hear your thoughts, when not to use them.
I think everybody wants this, Jenny, please give me this magical answer that will solve all of the things. And I'm going to disappoint you, because the answer, it depends. At the beginning of working on your OKRs, you need to be thinking about the investment of your time. If, let's say, all of your time is held up because, I don't know, something blew up and your back end is down, are you going to be working on your OKRs then? No, because you have to bring it back online. There's nothing to be necessarily working on. There's some fire that needs to be addressed, or else the whole building is going to go. And so don't do OKRs then. If I've heard, what about back office functions? Look, I think finance teams can use OKRs, HR teams can use OKRs, everyone can use them. It really is, what is the focus for the quarter, for the year? If the focus is status quo or trying to fix fires and you're doing lots of firefighting, this may not be a good time for OKRs. Or let's say there is really, really big things that need to be done for compliance reasons. I've heard this in banking, for example. We need to address all of these concerns, because if we don't, we're going to get fined, possibly sued. Not great. So they're going to have to focus on really practical things. OKRs, could be used in a context if you want to use them. So there are some instances I would suggest really be thinking about, what value do OKRs bring when you're thinking about the work that you have to do, what actually needs to get done and why it needs to get done? I like to think about it in terms of, we call this the modern operating at Quantive. You've got to run the business and you got to grow and change the business and transform at the same time. It's always happening. Talk to any business leader. They will tell you, you can't just stop running the business so you can focus on transformation. And you can't just, focus on the opposite. That can't be true, right? So there's always going to be some balance in the middle. Then I would say KPIs are for running the business. You got to monitor it, make sure everything's going good. If there are opportunities to really push the business ahead, that's where OKRs fit. And so to what degree right now, or any given point, are you trying to change or grow the business in some meaningful way? If the answer is, we need to do it, here are the reasons, here's what can be done, then use OKRs. Else, don't use them.
Okay. And when it comes to, it's very, Anita asked a similar question I also wanted to ask, so we're going to combine it a little bit. So she asked, what do you think are the most common pitfalls when using OKRs? But also, how to manage exactly if you have so many fires in the background, because some of the industries or some of the types of the companies just handle fires. It's part of the job. So should it be included in OKRs as well, or we should just make them smaller? What would be the advice of companies handling significant amount of time, some kind of fires, or being distracted from OKRs we set for a longer time, or for a couple of quarters or quarter?
Okay, so that's a lot of questions all at once. I'm going to try to address them.
Yeah, I rephrased a lot this one, so sorry for that.
Yeah. That's totally fine. So we'll start with Anita. Thank you so much for your question. What are the common pitfalls of using OKRs? We're going to start there.
Yes.
So I am one of the founding members for our Dreams with Deadlines community. shameless plug for us. You can find us at dwd.community online. We wrote something together with the other founding members called the OKR Program Failure Prevention Guide. So I'll enumerate the ones that we wrote about coming from our expert community. 1, jumping immediately into we're doing this. So this that's the first one. Imagine then this often happens. You'll have a C-level or someone who's high up in the organization. They read the book Measure What Matters or something. They go into the organization. They say, oh my God, I read this amazing book. We're doing OKRs. And then everyone starts to scramble to figure out how to actually do OKRs. It gets pushed to the teams without any kind of training. And then all of a sudden everyone's supposed to do OKRs. Like, this is a really not great way to do anything, is just to jump immediately into it. Number 2, not having a strategy or not knowing about the strategy. Like, imagine then how you're supposed to figure out what a product team is supposed to do when maybe the product strategy and the direction aren't clear. Because what if, I don't know, senior leadership says what we need to do is to integrate an AI component into our experience, because they realize that if you don't have this embedded in the experience, we're going to be left behind because someone else is going to do it. It's going to end up being table stakes. But the team continues to work on this other stuff. Like, there's going to be a disconnectedness. That's bad. So having a strategy, having the strategy be informed, that everyone understands it. 3, taking a big bang approach to this thing. Like, everyone gets an OKR, the Oprah style, if you're in the United States. This typically doesn't work well. I can point to a lot of OKR champs who have told us that this was a big fat fail. Start small. 4, assume that they're easy. They're not. They require training. And just like anything else that we do, which is building a skill, it requires lots of practice. You're going to probably start feeling better about your OKRs probably the 3rd time, the 4th time, the 5th cycle. 5, lack of investment in change management. It requires change management. The thing is, when we're thinking about how to do OKRs in this construct, let's say one of the struggles is you're a startup. You started to scale. You started to scale fast. And what you started to realize is over specialization in teams. That usually results in siloing, right? So therefore, you're using OKRs to break those silos to create this cross functionality. Here's the challenge. You have very structured approaches that are very department centric. Your organization right now is not able to do cross-functional OKRs well because you don't have those lines of communication, the cadence of how to connect everybody, the mentality necessary to start breaking down the walls. Like, you need to invest in other aspects so that cross-functional OKRs can even be a thing, to invite that conversation, to allow the room and the different, I would say, ceremonies that are necessary to foster the success of that cross-functional behavior. You need to invest in change management. 6, doing too much or not enough. OKRs matter when you make them matter. If you take on everything, which people try to do, I don't know how many organizations will say, oh, we've got like X amount of OKRs, as if they're proud of the fact that everything became an OKR. That's a fail. But then, like, also writing them up and giving it lip service, but not actually checking in on them, having no leadership basically back it and recognize people for good efforts, also sharing what the learnings were. If they don't matter to anybody and you have no investment in that, and you're focused on the status quo, it's likely going to break down. Like, that's just common sense. And then lastly, trying to force it. Like, this is a methodology and a way of working that I truly believe is better. Like, that's why I do what I do. But it only works when people actually see the value, which means that you have to work with them to understand that value, to respect their time, to respect the effort, even if they don't make it, because we're going to be working on things that might be novel and they may not work. And the organization needs to be able to stomach some amount of, I hate to say, failure. You may not make it. That's got to be okay. Organizations that can't deal with those things, again, like, where are you at in terms of your organizational capability and your overall culture? There are organizations that are better suited for this methodology and some that are not. Does that mean that people shouldn't try? I think people should give it a go, because I've seen the benefits. We even have a report that we pulled out that there are overachievers and they're actually seeing massive gains in terms of the strategy execution in their organizations for having done this. Because it's a beautiful thing when you have a bunch of people looking at it and saying, yeah, we're in this together. We see the problems. We're addressing the ones that we are able to address. Here's how we're measuring and tracking it. Here's how we're winning. Look at how our customers are benefiting as a result. Can you imagine an organization that could be like, we had a bunch of hypotheses. These ones proved well. These ones didn't. But this is what we learned. And it's amazing. Like, that's the kind of organization that I want to see. And ones that do OKRs well get to start to have that built in as a part of how they live and breathe. And it's beautiful. So.
Okay, and when it comes to those this aspect of a lot of fires in the backgrounds for some people, like, should it be included in OKRs or not so much? What do you think?
I mean, look, again, OKRs are about changing and transforming the business. Could you argue that fixing a fire is changing the business? Now, if you were to tell me we have observed all of these fires and we believe, based on our kind of, if you want to believe in root cause analysis, there might be multiple causes, right? If you are able to identify, oh my gosh, the reason why all these fires are happening is because of these reasons, then the application of OKRs are not about fixing the fire. It's about, and the symptoms. It's about fixing what's actually wrong, right?
Yeah, what causes the fire?
Right? What caused the fire to begin with? So if there were to be a place to apply OKRs, it would be after that diagnosis, because that would be a net change that hopefully would result in kind of a semi-permanent or even permanent solution that would reduce the number of fires on the on the other side. So again, it's thinking about the application of OKRs and where they make sense. It is about changing things for the better, about transforming things.
Okay. Okay. So the thing I also think a lot when working myself with OKRs is how to avoid doing a to-do list instead of key results, because this is very often happening, in my opinion. Maybe you're going to correct me here, but I think people have a tendency to put there a to-do list and not necessarily measurable key results to know how we progress. How do you deal with that when working with different companies?
Right. I mean, what we're trying to accomplish, and I was just talking to Tim Herbig about this because we recorded a podcast episode right before I hopped on this. So we discussed, like, you need to be thinking about why. Like, if you're going to, the challenge that we often find is that we know what we're expected to do because it's on the roadmap, right? We're like, oh, well, this is the next thing. We know that in the next whatever weeks, months, we need to ship whatever capabilities. Okay. The reason we get so tied in to, like, just getting it done. Now, the question we need to ask ourselves is, so what? So what if we got it done? And that's when you start thinking about measures. You start to think about, well, if we did do that thing, if we shipped that thing, so what? How would we know that that thing was used? That it changed behavior, that anyone cared, that it helped someone, that somebody would actually tell us, oh my gosh, I love this thing because it helped me do X, Y, Z. We want people to say those things, right?
Yes,
we want the word of mouth sharing. We want the recognition for that work. We want to have somebody testify. Like, we want testimonials. All of these things are awesome. But how do you back into that? Well, we hypothesize that if we did this stuff, it would get to that. But we need signals. Those signals are in the measures. So when you're looking at your to-do list of key results, start asking yourself questions like, if we did this, what would be the result? What would we change for the customer? How would their lives be better? How would the business be better? What effort would we ask of them? Would we reduce effort and start really honing in on things that we can potentially measure? And at the end of the day, folks, and you go to, let's say, another interview somewhere else, internal your organization or external organization, it is doubtful that someone is going to interview and say, how many things have you shipped? They're going to ask you, what was the impact of the stuff you shipped?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Think about it in the front then. Use that for your OKRs. That's your leverage. You're basically writing your own resume when you do OKRs well for an internal opportunity or possibly external opportunity. You have to be thinking about it. Again, be selfish about this. If I were to invest my time in helping the team build this, how would that help the customer, which inevitably helps me, because if I help them do that, that helped the business. You're starting to see the connection, hopefully, by now. I'm probably sounding like a broken record. I'm sorry.
No. I think it's exactly as you said. Education and repeating also helps a lot. We also got this question, which I think it's connected with what we've been talking for quite some time now. How often should OKRs be reviewed and updated? What is the ideal cadence for OKR cycles? Is there such cadence and ideal time frame for them?
Oh my, I can't. Oh gosh, everyone's like, give us the
People
answers.
want rules.
Everybody wants rules. Why do you all want to be bound by rules anyway? I think the way that so there are some evidence. Thankfully, one of our strategic partners is Ben Lamort from OKRs.com, and every month, every third Thursday of the month, so the next one's coming up, we talk about these very things. What he's found and what we're seeing in our research, so we actually found an OKR trends report, is that the cycle is like every quarter. Everybody seems to be doing OKRs on a quarterly clip. If you're at a company level, usually that'll be a little longer. So that might be a year. So that seems to be kind of where everyone is at. When you talk to Ben, Ben's like he's seeing kind of an uplift in 4-month cycles rather than 3-month cycles, the quarterly clip. And the reason why is to disassociate a few things. The first is, if what you're trying to do is really develop a learning culture, which is what OKRs do, then you want to separate this from performance reports or performance evaluations. Usually performance evaluations may happen on a quarterly or a half yearly or annual clip. So if you can do 4-month increments, then you kind of break that connection. So people are actually learning things, but also are, being evaluated separately. And you have that disconnect, right? And that's a good thing. The second is, at the end of a quarter, imagine like all of your product teams are shipping some big things at the quarter, half year, mark. And then you have the finance and you have the sales teams closing out the books and, getting their quota attainment. It's like everyone's hair is on fire at the same time when they have all of these regular run of the business things that need to happen, and they have the OKR things happening at the same time. So we're seeing an increase in the 4-month cycle simply because we don't want everyone's hair on fire at the same time. We want people to be able to focus on the things that need to happen at the kind of the natural calendar rhythm that makes sense. In terms of when to check in, which is a whole different process. So this is like, when do you talk about OKRs, with your team, etc. If you're a Scrum team, don't try to create a new thing for this, like a special OKR meeting, because people are just going to get burned out and they're going to feel like it's just another thing we have to do.
Another meeting, yeah.
Right? Bake it into your existing practices. So if you have sprint planning, you have sprint reviews, like think about OKR setting as then like a super sprint. And kind of bake it into the regular rhythm of check-ins when you do a retrospective, or whatever. Think about ways that you can leverage existing patterns of working and where OKRs can like up level you even more, because it's helping everyone focus on what really mattered, right? It's not about like, I don't know, 40 bugs were fixed, although that might be important. It's like, what? We're receiving feedback via, I don't know, our customer effort scores or whatever, that things are a lot easier now. we're moving in the right direction, everybody. This is awesome. And people can collectively start seeing kind of the most important metrics be impacted because the things that we think are correlated that would affect those higher level measures are being affected at the local level. And so the degree of you talking about it really is dependent upon like your natural cadence and rhythm of the business and what makes sense with your existing practices or the ones that you want to improve.
Yeah, okay. So last burning question for me is, should we do too hard to deliver OKRs or easy enough so we can complete 100%? This is like a forever discussion I hear from so many different sources. Do you also? Because there are a lot of advices like make them hard enough so you won't deliver them. And again, I know you may say that it's again trying to find some kind of rules written in stone. I get that. People love to ask about it.
Everybody loves to ask about this sort of
Yes.
stuff. Here's the thing. Okay. I love this because it came from one of my earlier podcasts. And well, I'll share that and then I'll back into kind of what I think the official answer might be. But
Okay.
he said, you know, when you're creating your OKRs, what you're seeking is a high five moment. Right?
Yes.
And the way to think about that then is if you, let's say that you developed an OKR, let's say that you had the strategic context, your leadership was working with you, your team came together, you had kind of a guide coach person help you develop your key results. So they're not to-dos, they're not like, off, we did it or we didn't kind of things. They're actual measures. Everyone feels good about it. If you were to like actually accomplish that and you told somebody about it in your team, whether it's within your team or external team, would you get a high five for that? Would you feel good about it? Like, I think that's a good measure for just yourself is creating these high five moments, right? And that high five moment, then, if we looked at the spectrum of easy enough so that we can get 100% or hard enough where we do the by the book 70%. Look, culture matters here, right? Some cultures do not feel good about hitting 70%. It just doesn't work for them because if they did it, they wouldn't feel like they had a high five moment. They'd feel like an utter failure. But then in other environments,
it's a great observation, yeah.
If you're in another environment, they may be like, we got 80%. We thought we'd get 70, but that's awesome for us. We're going to get a high five moment for that. And so the degree in which you feel like you can be ambitious is highly contingent upon how you perceive what is difficult and what is easy, which is all relative. It is relative to your team, to your organization, to its culture and its values. For some, it might be 100% is what we're going to do. And what's helpful is to tell everyone up front, and this is if you follow Ben Lamort's kind of scoring framework, he talks about this, is like having a commit, target, and stretch, right? So we commit to this is one measure. This is the target, and this is our stretch. And so the commit is we're going to hit 100%. But if we hit that, maybe we work up to the target, which is a little bit harder. And then maybe we work up to the stretch. Pick up his book. It's called the OKR Field Book. But he basically outlines this idea for organizations that even have more OKR maturity and are ready for it to start be thinking about even key results in terms of leveling so that this conversation about what's too hard, what's too easy is already predefined.
Yeah. Yeah, so definitely it depends on also culture and leadership style on a particular division as well, because what motivates people a lot. So we circle around a lot around this product evangelism, and we got a question from Mateusz Krawczyński, and his question is, let me read it. Product evangelism, when and which cases you think this approach should or should not be applied, and what are your tips for the teams that consider it?
When in which cases you think this approach should or should not be applied, and what are your tips for the teams that consider it? Maybe Magda, you can help me kind of unpack this question or rephrase it in a way. Sorry,
okay. I believe that the product evangelism is considered a direction of supporting companies, and this is how I understand Mateusz's question,
Mateusz, okay.
and how to and then if some teams consider it, so then what should or should not be applied from this direction? Do you even consider this a direction yourself as VP of Product Evangelism, or is it a direction, trend, or a field for you? Maybe this is the good question for starter to unpack this question, actually.
So it really is about the role of product evangelism within a product organization. Okay.
Yeah, I believe
that makes
so.
sense.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Right. So Guy Kawasaki was the dude that kind of popularized secular evangelism, right? He called, the quote I think about is, "You're selling the dream. You're helping people imagine a future, and you inspire them to help create it." Right. In my opinion, especially if you're in a startup, which I am, like the startup founder or CEO or founding team, that's like a really big part of the job, right? Because you got to keep people believing in the future that you want to create. Now, if you're a product manager, like where does a product evangelism fit? I think it fits within the product manager's remit. And the reason why is because parts of selling the dream, I think Marty Kagan talks about this, is in fact, thinking about how are you going to prototype that dream so that you get discovery feedback on it. How do you help people empathize with the customer by sharing the pain so that they can get to that better version of the future? How do you articulate that vision, what you hope to be, and what you want to be able to provide in the next few years? How are you sharing what you've learned as a result of the efforts you've put forth up until this point? To what degree are you sharing credit within the organization, but also to people who have enabled you along the way? That might even be partners or customers. Part of this, for me, part of my role is being able to give great demos. Like you got to know the product inside and out, because if you don't, like, how are you able to share the dream if you can't tell people what the thing can do to enable the dream? You got to be able to have your homework done. I am clearly excited about OKRs. I'm clearly excited about getting people to tangibly tell themselves and to the organization, here's our so what. We're doing this so that fill in the blank. And that's part of the role, is to be excited and learn how to share that enthusiasm with others and spend time with people who are interested in this, even marginally. So Magna, I'm talking with her. I'm talking with you, Magda, today about how this all works. And I'm spending time with all the folks that are online and maybe in the replay. So all of these components, I think Marty frames it really well. Like it's part of the role. And especially mine, because it's literally my role. But if you're in product management, especially in more senior levels, it has to be a part of a role, because most times when people join your organization, it's not because they love the practice of product management. It usually boils down to, I believe in the company mission. I believe in the vision of this product. Unlike, let's say, maybe for some developers who I know who are like, but I love Clojure, or I love React. Like we don't necessarily have the equivalent, because who's going to say, I love jobs to be done? Like we kind of all use the different frameworks.
I know a couple of PMs who would say that.
Maybe, but they wouldn't necessarily go to a specific company because, that's part of what they do. It's more likely that is a component that gets them in the door. And I'm not going to say that that's the case with engineering. I feel bad about saying that because I don't want to speak more broadly, but that's kind of the relationship that I see there. It's like our purpose is to enable these visions to be realized in the world. We imagine a better future for our customers. And the way that we do that is manifested by what it is that we bring to market. To what degree are we excited about that? Do we know how to showcase that excitement? That we can bring other people along with that idea? That we understand the pains out there? so that we can internalize that and turn that kind of in a judo, like we just flip that energy for good, right? Like all of these things matter. And so therefore, if I bring this back to the OKR conversation, OKRs are a way for us to understand that the impact, the influence that we have, that we can further evangelize because we see that whatever it is that we're doing is actually working. It all comes together.
Okay, so from a general perspective, you believe as a trend it will strengthen moving forward, that every company should at least get slightly interested in perceiving the company strategy as a product, and then using product management or product evangelism, depends on who you involve, to strengthen that and better define the product, which is strategy. This is how I understood our conversation a lot.
It's already happening. It's already happening. That's what people, I guess, is it's interesting because like how many podcasts, how many webinars, how many conferences have you been to where you'll hear a product leader speak and say, this is what we've learned. And oftentimes they'll touch on the vision that their company has, who they represent, what that's trying to do for their customer. That's evangelism work. That is evangelism work. And so if you think, it needs to be some formal spelled out thing, then I think
big bank,
you're kind of off the mark, because it is inherent, it is implicit in how you interact with other people. When they ask you, what do you do? Let's say, you work, I don't know, here at NetGuru. I'm like, hey, Magda, what do you do? She's going to start evangelizing to me, hopefully, about what NetGuru does and why it's so great that she works there and how long she's worked there and what her team is like. That in itself is a form of evangelism. You're telling people, why you get excited about it. That's good.
Okay. We also mentioned a couple of times, or even dozens of times, strategy itself. And we got question from Marta Konopka. And the question is, there are different types of strategies: company, product, tech, AI, data, etc.
Right.
How to best structure and align them together so that they are digestible for the teams?
The first thing that comes to mind is, thankfully, I have not worked in these kinds of environments. They should be very easily consumable, right? I think at the end of the day, when you can articulate a good strategy, you're able to pull kind of the simpler threads. Like, our strategy contains these 3 elements, whatever it might be, right? Aligning them together is a challenge for leadership altogether. The company is kind of the umbrella, and each of the requisite departments are like tethered to the overall company strategy. The alignment of that work really happens probably behind closed doors, most likely in most organizations, where those business units, line function leadership are saying, okay, based on what we've heard from the CEO, based on what we see from the external information we're receiving, what we're seeing happen in the marketplace, what we're hearing from our customers, if you have a product already in market, they're making all of these assessments to start to make those choices that we talked about. Those choices should be coherent, but that only happens when you actually talk about those coherences, like where it's coherent. And like usually that'll happen in like an offsite somewhere, right? And then the job is to articulate that to the rest of the organization. At Quantive, what I can tell you is that repetition is key. There is a short document in onboarding that all of us get access to that says, here is who we are. Here is what we do. This is why we exist. Here is our strategy. In a very short document that was written up by our senior leadership team. It gets referenced a lot. You'll hear people say, as part of our fill in the blank strategy, which is ... we are doing or investing in yada, yada, yada. Like, it's insane to me how a lot of people do not quite get that repetition is a very powerful tool in getting things to sink in. at some point, your teams will be like, this is what someone had told me a long time ago, and I've kept it ever since then. And they said, when people start to tell you what you told them, when they reiterate in their own words or exactly in your words, Jenny, what you said, they heard you.
This is
Like,
very true. Yeah.
right? I don't know how many times it's been like, oh, Jenny, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, you heard me. Yes. So because of that, let's talk about this sort of stuff. Repetition gets you to that point, but repetition happens when it's something that's easy to understand, that's being explained to you. If you have questions, ask the questions, even be like, okay, so, I have a question about this thing. And something what we do also at Quantive, which I really appreciate at our company All Hands, is we always reserve time for questions to our senior leadership team, to anyone on the senior leadership team about their strategy. No matter what role you're in, no matter what level of the business, you're able to ask, okay, so I noticed that our partnerships team is doing whatever, or I noticed that, I don't know, like our service consulting team is doing this. Our product team has shifted directions where this is a new offering. I was not aware that that was going to happen. What was the rationale behind that? And then senior leadership's responsibility is to actually answer clearly and to repeat, rinse and repeat. So those would be my tips. Have a documentation readily available. Introduce it early. Repeat as often until people start to iterate back to you. Create space for senior leadership teams to actually have a dialogue to check in on their strategy. Make sure that the strategy is actually getting executed, right? And the way to proxy that is through OKRs. It's a translation of, strategic intent and strategic direction is what OKRs inevitably, when done well, are. And then lastly, provide actual time for teams to engage senior leadership on questions that they have concerning the strategy, its direction, where it's shifting to, and why.
Yeah. But in the end, those sub strategies shouldn't deviate too much from the big strategy for entire company. They should be aligned as well. So
it depends.
It depends.
Right? Because and I agree with you. It may not feel like it. For example, let's say that you have you have like a longer term vision, right?
Mm-hmm.
It might be that some part of the organization is doing some kind of internal skunk works experimentation that's just like,
experimentation
whoa,
is different.
Right. So let's
course.
just be clear here that for the most part, like a majority of the organization will be aligned to the company or corporate strategy, but there might be components that are like trying to spike the next big thing.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned a couple of things you do in Quantive. So I'm also very curious of how do you develop new directions or products in your company, if you can share. So how do you approach that within your organization, like developing new products, new elements, or new solutions you want to propose out? How do you work on that?
That's good. That's a good question. We look at it multifaceted, right? On the one hand, we're big believers that good ideas can come from anywhere, which I'm really grateful for in this organization. You can be anyone on the team and propose something to be reviewed and assessed for the product team to incorporate. Oftentimes, our product teams will rely on customer feedback. Really, so it's really about observation, and observation can happen in either looking at specific cases, right? Aggregate data points, for example, or customer feedback, or interviews, or what have you. But all at the end of the day, it really is about observing what is real, like what's really happening. And then from there, what we like to think about is assessing that feedback or those signals in 4 categories. The first is annoyances, things that really bug us, like that's really annoying. The second is opportunities, things that we could be doing to deliver greater value. Typically, these are bigger chunks of work. There might be performance issues. So some part of our experience might not be performing well. And the other is user workflows. So we look at the holistic analysis of our user workflows and rate them. Like, 0 is impossible, 5 is flawless. And
Mm-hmm.
based on these feedback categories, then we can kind of contextualize if we get feedback internally, is that an annoyance? Is that an opportunity to exploit? Is that a performance issue, that a user workflow? And from there, it gets kind of, it's just service because we have kind of playbooks for how to address or approach each of these things. At the end of the day, what we try to do also is to be cognizant of innovation. So we actually have 2 roadmaps. We have an innovation roadmap that's really trying to exploit as many opportunities, like really big things that we want to stake claim on. But then we
Mm-hmm.
have like, kind of our run the business maintenance roadmap. And those 2 work in concert together. And any given team in the organization might be pulling or supporting some elements from both of those roadmaps. And I think it's worked quite well for us.
Okay, cool. So I'm trying to manage time a little bit. So probably we're going to be trying to wrap up slowly. So I always have this question, which is kind of funny, but I like to ask it as well. So if you had magic wand, if you could cast a spell that allowed you to provide education on a specific topic to all 12 years olds around the world, what would it be? If you could decide yourself selfishly, what would that be? Do you have such a thing you would like to spread around young minds? And be selfish, as you said yourself.
I think that's a good question. I read it when you sent the pre-note, and I was like, oh, this is a hard one. I have a goddaughter who is 14, so she's not too much older than this.
Yeah.
And I thought about her when I started to concoct an answer. What I would want to teach her and other people of her age is how to love herself. Because I think you get older and life gets hard. You go through a lot of things, and sometimes you internalize those things, and you think, you start to, I don't know. That's why I mentioned selfishness a few times. I think selfishness in some ways is actually quite healthy, because if we're able to take really good care of ourselves, then we're able to take good care of other people that we care about too, because we're in a good place. And that's something that I try to help her understand and learn, is like how to care for herself, how to love herself, how to recognize her own achievements, how to think about, her value, what she provides to the world, and why that's so great. I want her to know that she is loved. And I don't know if that came across with this OKR conversation too, but at the end of the day, I believe that we're all valuable. All of us have some awesome thing that we can bring into this world. And thankfully, product people get to do this as just, it's part of your life. It's part of your literal job, is to help someone's life be better. And so if there's anything I want anyone out there who is not 12 years old, maybe you're probably a little older if you're watching this, I want you to think about OKRs from that construct, that high five moment. What value did you deliver? And if you didn't make it, that's okay. You tried. But you're still awesome. And keep going. Get the signals to keep going, and feel good about it. So learn how to celebrate. And that's something I'm recently talking to my goddaughter about is, how do you celebrate? How do you reward yourself when you find those wins? And if you have something that you can be proud of at the end of this week, because I love Friday celebrations, as Christina Waukee talks about, I want you all to think about what you did this week that was especially well. Share that with somebody you cared about. Help them to celebrate with you. I think it'll be a good practice for all of us.
Yeah, it's a really strong wrap up, and I agree with you. I got the best advice: be kind to yourself. Probably 15 years later than
Mhm.
person from my question, but it was eye opening. Even though it sounds slightly cheesy, it was very eye opening. Be kind to yourself, and always put yourself somewhere in the top of your priorities. So, it's good advice, really. Um, I think I can't ask any more questions after this wrap up and part. So thank you very much for entire conversation. Of course, for everybody who did not have a chance to listen to entire episode or could not listen at all, feel free to get back to this episode on our platforms when we're going to repost the podcast with Jenny. And thank you again for the conversation between us two. Probably it's not going to be the last one. So thank you again for joining me.
Thank you, Magda. This has been a joy. I really appreciate this conversation. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Bye and have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.
Hmm.